Hey everyone, welcome back to KXAN Live. I'm Esmeralda Zamora, and today on this Wednesday we have our Kristen's Classroom segment with our meteorologist Kristen Currie. How are you doing, Kristen?
I'm pretty good, Esme. Weather's quiet here at home with the cold front coming through, so I have some time to really focus on what's going on with the tropics out east.
Yes, and we just talked about that storm. Still is a tropical storm as of right now, but we might have an update pretty soon.
Yes, so we're going to get an update on Tropical Storm Helene coming up at the top of the hour. Around 10 a.m. is when the National Hurricane Center gives us their next full update. But I wanted to kind of touch on potential tropical cyclone. This is what we had been calling what is now Tropical Storm Helene for most of the earlier part of the week. And I got a lot of questions about it. So let's jump in. You ready?
Yes, let's go.
Okay, let's do it. First Warning Weather University list of the day. If you watched KXAN News today, we touched a little bit on this, but we've got some more time to chat about it because it does get very convoluted when we start talking about the terms that we use when classifying and talking about tropical systems. By definition, a potential tropical cyclone is a system that is not yet fully formed as a tropical storm or hurricane for that matter, but it is expected to bring the tropical storm impacts and or hurricane impacts to land, anywhere in the land within the next 48 hours. So the reason why we were looking at potential tropical cyclone 9 earlier this week is because we didn't quite have that inner circulation of tropical storm Helene yet. We have the winds, but it wasn't a fully formed tropical storm yet, but we were already starting to see some of the impacts and those were going to get worse for parts of the Yucatan Peninsula as well as Cuba. So this is the National Hurricane Center's way of saying we know it's not a named storm yet, but because it's going to be impacting the anywhere in the land, like I said, in this case, the Yucatan and parts of Cuba within the next 48 hours, we need to designate it something so we can start putting out the alerts, the advisories, the watches, the warnings, those kind of things. So potential tropical cyclone 9 is what was, the initial name of what is now Tropical Storm Helene and expected to be Hurricane Helene. Now, there's usually a number that comes after a potential tropical cyclone. Like I said, this was potential tropical cyclone 9. Why? Because it's the ninth storm of the season. So this happened with an earlier storm too, potential tropical cyclone 8. I believe it was actually Francine, potential tropical cyclone Francine there. It was our 7th named storm, so it was PTC 7, PTC 8, PTC 9, those kind of things. So where it gets very confusing is depending on where tropical storms or hurricanes are around the world, they get different names. For us here in the United States, with the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic, those would be tropical storms or hurricanes. If there was a hurricane in the Western Pacific, they're called typhoons. Those are what impact Japan. If there was a hurricane in the Indian Ocean, those are called cyclones. It's the same thing. Australia gets impacted by cyclones. Now, by definition, they're all hurricanes, but just call them something different depending on where in the oceans they are. So potential tropical cyclone can get confusing, right? If I go backwards and show you, it can get confusing because we don't call storms cyclones here in America, right? The National Hurricane Center uses either tropical depression, tropical storm, or hurricanes. But the umbrella term for tropical systems is cyclone. So, does that kind of make sense a little bit? If I break it down like that, everything is considered a cyclone, but a potential tropical cyclone doesn't have a fully formed storm yet, but we very much expect it to do and impact land over the next 48 hours. Yeah. But only if it's in the Indian does it stick with that name, cyclone, the Indian Ocean.
And why do they have to differentiate the term hurricane between these different regions?
That's just what they do. I'm not sure the exact reason of why they said, hey, we're going to term these hurricanes and tropical storms, if they impact the U.S., and if they impact Japan, they're a typhoon. I'm not sure who made that decision, but I know with the National Hurricane Center, we would never see Typhoon Helene. That's it. It's the same, systems happening within that storm. It's a warm chord low it's the same processes happening. We just name it something different. So that is a good question, though, to figure out, why make it so confusing like that?
Why make them so different?
Why make them so different? Right. And, there's different sets of names to the hurricane names that I just showed you. That's determined by the World Meteorological Organization, but they use a separate set for typhoons and a separate set for the Pacific and a separate set for the Atlantic. So it gets very confusing, but if I kind of boil down to what do I need to know right now about the tropics, everybody's talking about this tropical storm Helene.
Yes.
Now, winds right now are 70 miles per hour. Category 1 is 74. So we are right there. This is a very high-end tropical storm. And Esme, like you mentioned, we get our next update soon. That's going to come in at 10 a.m. And it would not surprise me if we do see the Hurricane Helene. Briefly touching on remnants of John, because I did talk about this morning on KXAN News Today. This was a major hurricane that slammed into Acapulco as a Category 3 storm yesterday. It's just remnants now. It's falling apart. But interesting to note that this rapidly intensified. It went from a tropical storm to a Category 3 hurricane in about 24 hours, which is nuts. And that Acapulco area was the same area that got slammed by Hurricane Otis last year as a Category 5 storm. So we will be watching the Pacific closely, but as far as, maybe impacts to friends and family, a little closer home, Hurricane Helene expected to form today and then continue to make its way through the eastern Gulf of Mexico, forecast to become that Category 3 storm. Landfall expected tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. Wow. Okay. And when you showed that list of names, so the national...
I can go back, yeah.
Those list of names are created before hurricane season starts?
Oh, yeah. They're set in stone. Yeah. And in fact, we've got lists, and we can tell you next year's and the year after. There are 6 lists, and they rotate. If there is a super destructive storm or, heaven forbid, a very deadly storm, they will retire that name out of respect. And I think y'all talked about that earlier this week with Rich. Yeah. And so sometimes you'll see different names, but they'll come up too. In this case, this list will be found 6 years from now. So in 2030, we will use this same list if storm names don't get retired.
Just recycle the names.
Yep, they recycle the names. Yeah. So and it's as you can see, they're boy, girl, and we'll do this for the Atlantic, and then there's a separate set of names for the Pacific. We no longer use the Greek alphabet. That's a recent change here. If you remember, in 2020, we had more than the 21 named storms. We had to go into the Greek alphabet because there was more named storms after we exhausted the list. But there's now a separate set of names that will be used. We will no longer use the Greek alphabet.
Wow. And as far as rain, I know you probably weren't going to touch on this, but as far as rain here locally, are we going to see any more anytime soon?
Unfortunately, nah, girl. It's all going to be sunshine. So I can maybe pull up that 7-day forecast to show you, because this is going to be the one kind of downside to this front, is it will bring cooler mornings. It's definitely going to bring some drier air as well. Let me see if I can pull this up. Yep, there we go.
We're going to have that dry, warm winter.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an itty bitty rain chance in our southeastern counties for today, but outside of that, there is a whole lot of sun in our forecast for the next 7 to 10 days. In fact, temperatures wiggle a little bit locally as we're going to be looking at upper 80s tomorrow, but other than that, get used to the sunshine, get used to those low 90s, and enjoy the nice 60s we've got in the mornings moving forward.
And the evenings should be pretty.
The evenings should be nice. Yeah, with the drier air, the thing about drier air is it's easy to cool down, but it's also easy to heat up. So the morning lows are going to take more of an impact here with this cold front. It's not bringing in necessarily a colder air mass behind it, but a drier air mass. So that's why we're seeing the dip in the mornings and not necessarily in the afternoons.
And here on our website, KXAN.com, Miss Kristen Currie has her own article on what we just talked about today. So if you are interested in bragging to your friends what the difference is between a potential tropical cyclone, you can read it all here to refresh your brain and share that information to anyone.
For sure. And if anybody has any questions, let me know. I know it does get very messy when we start talking about hurricane versus cyclone versus PTC. I'm happy to answer questions if you shoot me an email. If you have a topic you'd like me to discuss, you can also send that my way at kristen.currie@kxan.com.
Yes, and we do this segment every Wednesday morning. So if you have an idea that we should touch on, please forward that to Kristen and we can make that happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, Kristen.
Of course.
And that's all we have today here on KXAN Live. Remember, we'll be back later today with more live streams and next week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Esmeralda Zamora.